Hello. I just got finished watching a documentary on one of my favorite performing artists, Luther Vandross. The name of the documentary is called Luther, Never Too Much. And it was created by CNN Films in conjunction with Sony Music and Foxhole Productions. So I want to share with you some of the information that was shared in this documentary. Now, there weren't a lot of things in this documentary that I was not aware of in regards to Luther Vandross. However, I do appreciate some of the raw footage that was shown during the documentary. So the documentary kind of begins with an interview that he had with Joan Rivers. And Joan Rivers asked him, hey, did you grow up very poor? And so Luther replies, he was like, well, when there's love in the home and attention, you don't really, that type of thing doesn't really register, being poor or being rich. In fact, to quote, he says, if there is love in your home and in your life, none of that stuff registers. He said that they were well cared for, well fed, and at Christmas time they had toys. So quite honestly, he said he would have to ask his mom if they were poor, because he, for all he knew, he had a great life as a kid. So his influence, he calls himself a Motown child, right? So during that era, it was all about the Supremes for him. He loved the Supremes, and the Supremes would perform on the Ed Sullivan Show each Sunday night. And so that was his thing. He had to watch the Supremes, right? So whenever he would get in trouble, his mom would restrict him from watching the show on Sunday night. So he made sure that, he kept it a buck. He made sure that all his chores were completed so that, he would not have to miss watching his favorite group. The documentary mentions also some of his childhood friends that he had. One in particular was Fonzie Thornton, whom he met at the age of 15. He was also a background singer for Luther Vandross and a musical collaborator. They would bond over, the Ed Sullivan Show and music. Another lifelong friend that was introduced is Robin Clark. They met in the 11th grade, and she mentioned that like one of their first dates as friends really was Luther inviting her over, for lunch, and then them listening to music together. And then the last person that was introduced in this particular segment is a guy named Carlos Alomar. I'm not certain if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but he was a lifelong friend and a musical collaborator as well. And one of his earliest memories of Luther was him carrying around this music composition book that was just had lyrics in it and was stuck with pages of lyrics inside of this booklet. So those were the three childhood friends who were speaking on Luther's life in this particular segment. The first band that Luther Vandross was in is called the Shades of Jade. And so Luther asked Fonzie if he would be in this group. And Fonzie replies, yeah, I'll be in the group. He was like, okay, well, if you're going to be in the group, that, you have to have the uniform. You have to wear the uniform. And so he was like, well, what's the uniform? He was like, well, with a name like Shades of Grey, we have to have, these shoes. I saw these green patent leather shoes, and, we want all the guys to get the shoes in the band. And so the shoes were $23. And so Fonzie was like, I don't think my mom's going to pay $23 for, some shoes. And so, so Luther goes to Fonzie's mom and explains to her, why he needs the shoes and, about the band and everything. And so the mom relents and, gives Fonzie the money so that he can buy the shoes. So also, Carlos was asked to be in the band. And so Carlos is Puerto Rican. And so Carlos's mom doesn't speak any English at all. And so Luther is going there speaking to his mom in this broken Spanish, trying to explain to her why the shoes are, important and why they're needed. Needless to say, he did get this point across, and the shoes were purchased by Carlos's mom as well. The documentary goes on to mention Luther Vandross's influences. So he studied singers. So the people who influenced Luther Vandross the most in his singing style were Aretha Franklin, the Sweet Inspirations, which was a group, and Dionne Warwick. What he studied about Aretha Franklin was her soul, the versatility of her voice, her range, and her tone. And with the Sweet Inspirations, which, if you are aware, was a group that Cissy Houston was in, he studied their harmonies. Now, Dionne Warwick, he liked the grace of her voice and the tonality of her sound. And in fact, Dionne Warwick was credited as influencing Luther Vandross the most to be a performer, because he went to a show of hers at the Brooklyn Fox Theater that he was just like awe-inspired by, which made him want to pursue singing professionally. So the first group that Luther joined is called Listen My Brother. Now, this group was owned and it was managed by the owners of the Apollo Theater. And one of the big perks of that, as you can imagine, was that he could go to any performance that he wanted to go to. Any performance at, the Apollo Theater. So that was a big plus. The group consisted of 5 guys and 5 girls. And they sang original songs, empowerment songs about being young and black, right? Topical songs of the time. One day, their management team stated that, someone was going to come see them perform the next day. Well, this person happened to be Jim Henson. And Jim Henson is the master puppeteer. We all know him from The Muppets, and probably more famously from Kermit the Frog, that puppet. So, come to find out, he liked the group, and so the next day when they return, their management tell them, hey, you're going to be on this television show for kids. That television show was Sesame Street. So this was their first television appearance, was on Sesame Street. And actually, I do remember those episodes, or that episode where they were on there singing. And so they sang, of course, soulful songs. They arranged the alphabet and numbers to like soulful renditions of songs. So, they would slap some soul on an ABC and slow on a 1, 2, 3. Okay? And the documentary also mentions that this probably was perhaps Luther's first introduction to the prejudices in the industry. And what they highlighted was, being black and heavy. Now, while he was in the group, Listen My Brother, he was not the top dog in the group, although they state that he could sing better than anyone in the group. But some of the prejudices that he was starting to experience were related to his appearance and his size. Of course, they state that, you don't know it's a problem until it's presented as a problem. And during this time, after the television thing, that's when this started to kind of show up. All right. And the prejudices were pretty much not against the talent, but against the look, right? All right. So while Luther was a part of this group. Listen, my brother, he had applied to college in Kalamazoo. He wasn't expected to be accepted into the college, however, he was. And so, incidentally, he ends up leaving the group and going to Kalamazoo to attend college. He did great in his first year. They say, well, he says, he was like a B average student. However, he was miserable. He was miserable. And Fonzie mentions that, during that time, he would call home frequently, to see, what were they rehearsing, what songs were they were doing, what was going on. They were at school, but his heart was really in the music industry. So much so that he called his mom and he was like, Mom, is it okay if I drop out of college and pursue music 100%? And she was fine with it, to his surprise initially. But then he found out that most likely she probably was okay with it because his dad was a brilliant singer, in his words. And so perhaps she saw the potential in him, and that's what made it much more agreeable for him to leave school and to pursue it 100%. And so that's what he set out to do. He was like, I'm going to do this, and if I fail, I fail, but I'm going to be doing this until, if it takes me being 81 years old doing it, I'm still going to do it no matter what. And so he set out with determination that this is what he's going to do, and that's what he did. Also, incidentally, his father passed away when he was 8 years old, unfortunately. That was mentioned as well. Not a lot about his father in this documentary, only that it was said that he was a brilliant singer. He was a great father. He was present. He was in the home. And that he passed away when Luther was 8 years old. So we mentioned the Motown sound, right? We have all, the buttoned up, the gowns, the tuxedos, the class, the formality of Motown and what it contributed to music. Well, now during this time, the Philly sound starts to enter on the horizon, on the scene. And, artists of that time like Gamble and Huff, the OJs, the 3 Degrees, First Choice, they offered a different type of music. It was very lush. It was very East Coast. And the grit of the Philly sound was not like the Motown sound, which, as we know, was more buttoned up and formal, gowns and tuxedos and class, this whole presentation. The grit of the Philly sound, they felt, was more closely related to the Black experience. It more reflected the Black experience. And it stripped the formality of the Motown sound, with the gowns and the tuxedos. And an interesting comparison that was used in describing the two was that the Philly sound was more, come as you are and scream a little, pick your hair out, let your big afros bounce around and, let it be big and bouncy. While Motown was more, we matching, but we gonna be home by midnight, I thought that was interesting. I loved that comparison that was used between the two sounds. So the Philly sound attracted David Bowie. All right. And David Bowie, as we all know, is this big rock and roll dude, right? From across the pond. So David Bowie, and also Mick Jagger was also attracted. Of course, the Philly sound again was gritty, it was soulful, and it was, and it was the next, the new next thing. And so David was recording an album called The Young Americans at the time. And so he calls Carlos to come and record, do the session for recording the album. Well, like many artists, you go to sessions, you go to rehearsals with your friends, with other singers, with other musicians. And sometimes, someone may not show up for whatever reason. It might be they're sick, they can't make it for whatever reason. And so, if you're at a session and your friend there and they sing and they can fill in, then you're like, oh, well, my friend does this. And so, they can help out. And so this was kind of like what happened in this case, so Carlos is at this session for David Bowie, and he brings Luther along with the other friend too. What was her name? Where's she at? Robin. Yeah. And so Robin is there, Luther and Robin is there with Carlos at this session. And so while this session is going on, this is another thing that's kind of one of the characteristics of being in sessions is that, it's some downtime in there as well. There's some playback, there's recording, there's playback, and all this other stuff. So while, Luther's sitting there, he's listening to the music and everything, but he starts creating these melodies in his, in his head. And so he's sitting there making stuff up while they're doing things. And of course, at this point, he is not a part of this session at all. He's just there. And so, he turns to his friend Robin and he's like, hey, what you think about this? And so he starts doing some background stuff. But little did he know that David Bowie was like behind him at the time and had heard him. And so David Bowie was like, ooh, I like that. Let's put it in there, right? And so David immediately loved his voice and loved his ideas and asked him, hey, would you like to be a part of this session? And so, of course, Luther's like, okay, yeah. And so Luther gets in there and starts being in the session. Well, not only is he being a part of the session now, he ends up arranging like the entire album with David Bowie on the Young Americans album. So he's doing background and he's arranging the vocals. David Bowie loved him, and so much so, Luther also at that time had his own group called Luther, and he has his own material, his own originals. And so David Bowie had heard one of his songs. At the time it was called Funky Music. That was the name of the song that was written. And David Bowie loved it. He was like, but that song is I'm rock and roll. This song is too funky. I can't, that's not my thing. And so Luther rearranges the song to make it more David Bowie's taste, and he calls it Fascination. So he rewrites the song, and the song Fascination is recorded by David Bowie. Also from that meeting, again, now, he's doing session work for David Bowie. He's arranging vocals, and he's touring with David Bowie now, of course, doing the backgrounds. But David Bowie is also going a step further and allowing Luther to open the shows for him. So he would allow Luther Vandross 30 minutes to perform all of his original material before David Bowie's show would start. So that was a great experience, but it was a bittersweet experience also, because during Luther's performance, the crowd would be chanting, Bowie, 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 Bowie. So Luther was like, look, dude, are you trying to kill me? If you're trying to kill me, just take an axe. Just do it with an axe, okay? And David Bowie was like, chill. He's like, this is good for you because this is allowing you to sharpen your skills. This is giving you experience of a lifetime for the career, the great career that I know that you're going to have, So just, go ahead and do your thing. And so, that's how that went. So subsequent from his work with David Bowie, performing live and arranging, David Bowie introduces Luther Vandross to Bette Midler. All right, he toured with Bette Midler for many years, and Bette's show was always a big production. And so he credits David Bowie and Bette Midler for his impressions on what to do on stage when it came to elaborate performances. And so for the rest, please stay tuned for part 2.